Hi, in the paper today, I want to explore the concepts of the body and person in the past using a theoretical approach. And in this session, I'm wanting to challenge the views that you've already got on the body and personhood and prompt attendees to look at human remains in a more nuanced way, using a theoretical approach. So the current concept and way of approaching this, I don't feel it adequately captures the complexities of it. And even the best traditional approaches work within the dichotomy of biological versus social and focus on specific areas of the body and personhood like gender or identity or age, rather than creating a holistic framework from which we can assess everything. So much like the assessment of Iron Age hillforts, the only applicable measure of standardisation is the significant degree of variation. Diverse perspectives on the body and personhood in society generally indicate that we need a broad spectrum starting point in archaeology too. And as a way forwards, I think we've got to assume that there were complex and varied concepts of the body and personhood in the past. So let's step outside of archaeology for a moment and look at how we experience our own body. Let's try looking at the obvious ways that we're all accustomed to for a moment. We're usually asked to define ourselves in terms of gender, sexual orientation, and ethnic origin when we fill in forms, talk to companies, or even register at university. But can we experience our body in these ways alone? If you identify as female, do you experience this as just your genitalia, or is there more of a social construct behind this? Women experience high degrees of prejudice and inequality. Our whole identity can be based on how closely we line up to society's ideas about what we should be, or its antithesis. Disability affects how we experience the body, physically and socially. I have ME, and my body's experiences of walking to the shop or taking a shower are probably very different from your body's experiences of the same activities. Disability is also frequently used as a deficit model, where we're seen as lacking the qualities of a whole human or a working body, meaning we can view our body very negatively if we compare ourselves to others or buy into the rampant discrimination regarding this from society. This is especially true for hidden differences and neurodivergence. Autism, for example, means that our physical body experiences our surroundings very differently to neurotypical ones, not just socially, but right at the very core of our physical being. Sound, touch, taste, sight, they all physically feel very different if we're autistic. We can even have alexithymia, where we cannot easily identify what we're feeling, physically or otherwise. We might not know we feel hungry, for example. Mental health issues can affect how our body might feel to us too. Indeed, our body even feels different to us at different times of the day, doing different activities. At different stages in our lives, we have different relationships with our changing body, from childhood to puberty and beyond, especially if we're growing children. Even the body's fight, flight, freeze and fawn response is different in different bodies. Trauma means we can get stuck in a particular response, even when the threat has disappeared, such as hypervigilance, or ordinary stimuli elicit very different responses from a traumatized body compared to the next person. We only have to look at our varying responses to a deceased relative and how we view their body, especially the further we go into mourning, to see the plethora of different approaches over different cultures and religions. We might revere a necklace of our deceased ashes, or we might see their body as nothing more than an empty vessel, and anything in between. In all of these areas, each individual has a different experience of their physical body versus the next person. But physical and metaphysical are inextricably bound. Factor this into the model so far, and the idea of the body and personhood explodes with possibilities. So what is a body or person? Sorry. Here we go. So it's traditionally seen as inextricably bound to the biological sexing of the skeleton. Emerging dialogue since circa the 1960s, for example, Butler, has added the social experience into this, but it's far from mainstream yet. Few excavation reports examine the body in a biological and social context. Body and person are both physical and metaphysical, and so much more. To define this, we must lean on the human element of Fowler's definition of a person, in that it's any entity that can be conceptualized as a person through often temporary association with different aspects of gender or soul. This is from Fowler 2004, page 13. This paper pays particular attention to the human element of the body and person, noting its categorization as such is contextually variable. Fowler 2004, page 13. But it's also mindful of the non-human, inanimate, material culture element of personification and its inherent colonialism and diversification, particularly in non-Western cultures. So is a body or person the sum of all their parts then? And what are our concepts of the body and person? As is evident from Fowler's foundations alone, crystallization of the concepts of the body and person are inherently complex. They're made up of further models relating to areas such as gender, identity, soul, and social position, but are inherently more than the sum of these component perceptions. The natural analytical stimulus that people in the past can only be analysed using the modern assumptions around the body and person as a framework, for those are all we can say with any certainty, seems relatively unquestioned by many archaeologists, such as Araujo. As often do these modern assumptions, a plethora of authors, such as Trigger and Richardson, take it for granted that aspects contributing to what Fowler terms the ongoing attainment of personhood, such as community and social structure, operate in the same essentialist Western androcentric model. See Araujo et al. 2019, Richardson, Trigger, they're just some of many examples. But this is a good place to start though, right? Or is it? Such an analytical approach seems logical on the surface, creating a peg to hang the analysis off. But upon further examination, it's problematic at best, as the current concepts of the body and person are far from crystallized themselves. Something that Harris and Rob are keen to point out. Furthermore, this approach would be to presuppose that the body and person were dualist constructs. But could this ever be true? Whilst one can be visibly divided from their physical body, in the sense that their flesh is decomposed, leaving skeletal remains, viewing these remains as part of a divided whole, or frequently in the case of archaeology as the whole person left behind, is artificial and discounts so much useful information, as authors such as Harris and Coppola pointed out. Not only would such an approach be classifying the past through modern eyes, but it would also severely limit the study of such areas by discounting the interrelationships between the body and person and resulting complexities. Ironically, such an approach would almost be leaving people out of the past, in incongruence to processualism's mantra, despite dealing with the physical remains of a person and the body. Unintentionally, archaeologists almost seem to credit these physical remains with secondary agency and yearn to make available their narratives without seeing that to do so is operating in an artificial microcosm. It almost conjures images of a human femur leaping from the laboratory table and given a voice able to share its story. Ridiculous, right? But aren't scientists impartial? As Smuts and Haraway realised, the notion of an impartial scientist can be empirically tested by relating it to the observance of other species. The study had startling findings that human objectivity hindered natural animal behaviour, and it was only through interaction, and therefore causing the observation to be relational, that the natural behaviour could be re-established and so understood in any meaningful way. Harris and Coppola 2017, page 159 to 162. Similarly, relational theory is the only sensible step forward in neutralising the dualist foundations of the body and personhood theory to formulate a new approach. As can be seen by applying Ingold's relativist theory to this dichotomy, body and person cannot be adequately explained by the dualism of natural organism versus cultural design, far from it in fact. But if we explore the degree of human involvement in the process of their emergence, Ingold 2000, page 187, the complexities of their relationship begins to emerge. And we can see that despite appearing separate at first, the physical body and the cultural person are both subject to human modification and cultivation. What about if we just add the metaphysical to the current approach? Building on this initial foundation, ontological, phenomenological, and post-Enlightenment theorists, Marshall and Alberti, for example, Harris and Robb, rightly posit that the body and person can only be understood through both physical and metaphysical discourse, meaning that while skeletal analysis and excavation of associated grave goods can provide archaeologists with great insight into the contemporary human condition, this can only be meaningfully understood when such findings are analysed in relation to the concepts of the body and person as social agents. Harris and Coppola, 2017, page 71-7. Their division was unintentional, arguably a pseudo-division. And if we want to understand the human condition of the skeleton before us, because the body and person are only able to be understood through their coexistence or symmetry, as Harris and Coppola and many other authors hasten to point out. That is, skeletal remains are only partially understood through science and have to be analysed from the metaphysical plane by putting them into their contemporary social context. Skeletal remains, like any material culture, can only be understood through their interrelationships with the humans who come into contact with them. Dualist discourse erodes entirely in this landscape. As Webmore and Whitmore rightly assert, things are us. 2008, page 53-70, both literally and figuratively. We could not undertake the entire concepts of the contemporary body. We could not understand the entire concepts of the contemporary body and person from just a skeleton, any more than we could understand the totality of Gell's car from just its exhaust pipe. But we are progressing in areas associated with the body and person, right? In other areas of conceptualising the body and person, the recent move towards dismantling colonial discourse and gender bias by authors such as Voss, Schmidt and Joyce provides some useful critiques of the peg-hanging approach upon which gender, being the cultural elaboration of biological sex, is predicated. But it's still only partial. These ideas seem very nucleated and in their infancy. They need tying together to form a cohesive whole, and a great deal of further exploration is needed to produce a new analytical framework for gender and then onto the body and person. Surely we're still progressing in gender theory, though. That's part of the body and personhood, right? Whilst it's arguably true that we need some tangible, universal known element or truth to begin from, critical reflection of these prerequisites, although welcome, seems emergent in the disciplines surrounding discourses that form the body and person, such as gender. Harris and Robb discuss the flaws of such an approach, 2018, page 128-47, and the need for breaching the predominant impasse, which focuses on the attribution of gender by authors such as Conkey and Giro, Joyce, Schmidt and Voss, or dismantling of the biological determinisms which equated women with their bodies by authors such as Beauvoir, without dealing with the fundamental errors of the approach as a whole, which is predicated upon a single dichotomous relationship between biological sex and cultural gender. Deconstruction of this flawed premise would also destabilise the foundations of the concepts of not just gender, but also the body and personhood, of which its crystallisation is an integral part. Rightly so, Harris and Robb deduce that the foci of the aforementioned works are the dismantling of prior narratives and construction of new ones for each historical or geographical point and or site, rather than the creation of an entirely new framework of analysis or model of interpretation. So whilst there are great beginnings, there is little forward motion or cohesion in this approach, and it's an area in considerable need of further exploration. Surely there's some element of universal truth biologically. So if our concepts of the body and person are so complex just in terms of their crystallization, can any of their indivisible parts be made any clearer? Do we really have any absolute truths or universal knowns to make the peg-hanging theory work? Not really. We come back to Ralston's nuance that there is no homogenization possible due to the high degree of variation. Biologically speaking, we have two main groups of sexes and bodies, but also a wide variety of chromosomal combinations and permutations of the physical body within and external to these confines. Similarly, if we discuss personhood and identity, there is considerably more diverse ways in which a human can choose to identify, as almost any cultural construct, or even the antithesis of these, or something further afield from such colonially charged, inherently biased dualisms, and more nuanced and relational? It's all relative. The only universal truth visible is that of contextual variation. Every concept of the body and person are relational to the individual in question. Every context or component part of these theories are relational to the same individual. It can even be extrapolated further that the archaeologist then analyses these in relation to themselves and their contemporary wider context. We can agree broadly that a burial contains a human skeleton of X age and Y gender, but we cannot know whether the individual identified as such, or even identified as the genders we prescribe at all. They may not have even identified as human. So in practice, theories on the body and person used to analyse the Burqa burial, for example, were relative to the individual buried. So were theories of the gender, identity, social position, etc. Price et al. 2018 analysed the remains in relation to their own understanding and inherent biases of these ideas, subsequently critiquing them and proving their antithesis. What initially appeared to be biologically male, due to their analysis of their grave goods, in fact turned out to be biologically female. So does any of the traditional model work? So can any of this be used to assume that our concepts of the body and person were the same as those of people in the past? Fowler and Brooke rightly critique the predominant essentialist analysis of personhood in the past through modern eyes. Fowler 2004, Brooke 2019. Although similarly revolutionary, this is again in its infancy, particularly when compared to areas such as gender theory. This leaves archaeology with an unfilled vacuum, as such theories focus on critique of existing methods rather than charting a way forwards, as Harris and Robb note. But in practice, we can't work with a vacuum. We simply cannot use this to escape accountability, though. There has to be meaningful discussion on how to address this issue. Ontological discourse suggests a more transient element to answering fundamental questions, such as whether humans can turn into animals or not, suggesting that some people inhabit a reality in which it is possible, some not, and a third more fluid outlook. Alberti et al. 2011, page 902-3. Can we apply this to the body and personhood in a similar fashion to resolve this? As Harris and Robb note, 2012, page 563, this still gives us no cross-cultural absolute bottom line grounded in it, the inherent nature of the body. Does anything give us this? Not at present. I'm not sure it could even be possible. However, I can see a way forwards. The revolutionary work of Harris and Robb in creating a relational approach to gender in the Neolithic, founded on contextual production of difference, 2018, page 141, referencing Harris and Robb 2013, lays a solid foundation from which to assess not just concepts of gender in each archaeological period, but also a framework from which the body and person can also be crystallised. This theory could be extended even further to allow analysis of hitherto unexplored binaries and dualisms within the wider discipline, such as approaches to wealth inequality and perceptions of status. Just maybe such an approach could even be mapped across archaeology as a whole. This area has huge potential and would not be without its exceptions, but further extrapolation and exploration of this as a theory is not just warranted, but pivotal for the future assessment of these concepts in relation to archaeology. And here's a segment of the bibliography with some of the key works that I've mentioned, and the full bibliography is in the site notes if anybody would like any of that. Thank you very much for listening.